Lewis Art for the Ring Magazine. Delighted today to be joined with the Ring Magazine's very own Keith Idec here on a nice Wednesday, I guess Wednesday morning for you, Wednesday afternoon for me. Yeah, Keith, it's good to be speaking to you, I guess, on the back of what was probably one of the busiest weekends of boxing for a very long time. Yeah, Keith, I guess, how's things? How are you?
I'm doing well, Lewis. Yeah, thanks for having me on, man. I appreciate it. Yeah, it was a jam-packed weekend and an interesting weekend for a variety of reasons. So yeah,
Yeah, absolutely. I guess, we'll touch first things first. We'll touch on Friday, Times Square. Yeah, I guess spectacle, probably, an incredible spectacle, but an interesting night, especially in the ring. What was your, I guess, main takeaway, Keith, from what we saw on Friday?
yeah, the fighters have to fight, Lewis. Right? I mean, you can put them in the perfect position, the perfect setting, and there were some things I think logistically that do not work for fighters in terms of them getting warmed up and then cooling down and coming to the ring. And there are lessons to be learned in a variety of ways from the way that this show was put on, and it was a massive undertaking, of course. But the fights themselves were frankly not entertaining, and I think the fighters now. If you're making a certain amount of money, there is a responsibility to entertain. Of course, their foremost concern is to win the fight because if you don't win, you're penalized financially for not winning, which will happen to Ryan Garcia. But there is some responsibility to entertain, to try to, to give fights who fans who paid either $60 or bundled it together for $90 in the U.S. anyway, $90 combined for the Friday and Saturday shows. They deserve some entertainment value for their money. And like I said, while your responsibility first and foremost for your career is to win the fight and move forward, you can't have people coming away from an event like this feeling like they, for all intents and purposes, wasted their time watching 36 rounds of action. The NYPD NYFD amateur fight was reasonably entertaining. Reito Tsutsami, he looks like he has some ability. I think we all need to, not that any of us are really doing it, but mentioning him in the same breath with Naoya Inoue, let's everybody calm down. But he does seem to have some ability, and he did press the action. He was in there with a guy who was probably better than his 1-2 record, so they matched him in a competitive way. But the three main fights, Teofimo Lopez was, from a tactical standpoint, excellent, but Arnold Barboza didn't try to do anything different, I didn't think, from rounds 1 through 12. And it was a huge opportunity that he had wanted for a long time. And I just kind of felt like, Barboza's a very good dude, and he had won back to back fights that really helped him ascend to the position where Teofimo Lopez had to fight him now. But I don't think he really stepped up in the way that he was hoping to. He didn't. And I don't know what was going on with Jose Ramirez. It looks like Jose, I think mentally he wants to fight in the way that he used to fight, but physically might not be capable of doing that anymore. Devin Haney played it entirely too safe and may have been shell shock's the right word, but certainly mindful of what happened to him against Ryan Garcia in his last fight. And then, of course, once Rolly knocks Ryan Garcia down in the second round, he was reluctant to open up because he knows Rolly can crack. And, he was very effective with his jab to the body. His body work in general was pretty good. Wasn't a scintillating fight either, but obviously a great performance or a great win. The most noteworthy win of Rolly Romero's career.
Yeah, sort of just breaking down a few things there. I saw a lot of sort of takeaways, a lot of opinions from the weekend. And you mentioned there about sort of the onus on fighters when they are getting paid a certain amount of money to fight. Do you think there's also a claim that I know I saw a video from Timothy Bradley and he was talking about fighters being a bit too spoiled now? Do you think there's a claim for that as well?
Paid. Well, I think what was lost in this a little bit is that, yes, when the Saudis entered the market, they certainly overpaid in purses because they were trying to disrupt the market. That happens when anyone else new enters the boxing business. They have scaled that back somewhat. Now, the fighters are still being compensated well, but I wouldn't say they're being grossly overcompensated. So I think this is, and I wrote this for the Rings website earlier this week. I think now is a pivotal point where I think Turkey and the Saudi group need to say to fighters, like, look, we're willing to pay you what we feel that your market value is, and maybe in some people's eyes, a little above what the market value is, but you're going to have to deliver. We're not just going to
Yeah.
keep paying you, and then you're just going to, go through the motions over the course of 12 rounds and keep getting paid huge purses. That needs to stop. So this is the point where I think you can send that message. Shakur Stevenson's a good example. Shakur's got a fight coming up on a ring card on July 12th. Shakur is a very talented fighter, but he has not delivered entertainment value for that is commensurate with the purses he has been paid. This is his opportunity to show that he can fight in an entertaining way and still be a responsible defensive fighter and an elite level technician. But you also have to entertain, because if he doesn't do it in this fight, you can't continue demanding the types of purses that these fighters are demanding if you're just going to play it safe and win fights and just say, hey, I'm undefeated, I'm undefeated, I'm undefeated. Because that UFC model, while I'm not a huge MMA fan, fighters are not penalized as much when they lose a fight. And I think that's more what we need to move toward. If you bring it and you lose in an entertaining fight, don't discard that fighter and then just say, oh, well, the other guy's undefeated. I think entertainment value matters maybe more now than it ever has before.
Yeah, look, I definitely agree there with what you're saying, Keith. On the fights as well, we've just touching on the main event, I guess, I suppose, with Ryan Garcia and Ronnie Romero. I mean, a lot of people were surprised with the result. Yeah, I guess what was overall your thoughts on the main takeaway from that? And I guess the performance from Ryan, because, I know he spoke about the atmosphere and that, and felt like, he just sort of let the fight he just sort of was okay to lose the fight. It's a bit of a weird performance. I'm not sure what your thoughts on that was.
I think the one person who wasn't surprised, certainly by what happened in the second round, was Ryan Garcia, because he knows that Rolly can really punch. They had sparred twice. It was 8 years ago or so, but they did spar on two separate occasions. I think it was 3 rounds apiece on back-to-back days, from what Henry Garcia recalled of what happened. And Rolly definitely got the better of Ryan Garcia during those sparring sessions. Now it's 8 years and fighters develop, and obviously Ryan has accomplished a lot as a professional prize fighter since then, but he knows that Rolly can punch, and Rolly doesn't look like someone who has the delivery system to do what he obviously did on Friday, because he's very unconventional. His footwork is frankly a mess oftentimes, but he did a great job on Friday night by not only getting off in an exchange, getting off that left hook that put Ryan Garcia on the canvas. The thing that I was most impressed by was Rolly's discipline that he showed over the course of the entire fight, from rounds 1 through 12, in protecting himself from Ryan Garcia's left hook. So even if Ryan Garcia had opened up more than he did, because he was certainly reluctant to let his hands go after he got knocked down, Rolly had his right glove up almost attached to his face. So he was in position to at least partially block those left hooks from Ryan Garcia. And then, like I said, once Ryan tasted that power with 8-ounce gloves and no headgear, he's like, man, I got to be careful here. And he actually said after the fight, which I'm sure you saw, Lewis, in the post-fight press conference, he said he never really felt like he got into a rhythm in training camp. He felt like off for whatever reason. He never felt like he was there physically, and not that he was off mentally, but he just didn't feel good. He didn't feel like he was ready to fight at the highest level. He was in shape and he made weight this time and all that, but he just didn't feel good about going into it. And then you get disrupted by warming up and then getting into a Batmobile, and he said kind of smelling gas fumes as they kind of inched down the street to get to the venue. So there were a lot of things that might have discombobulated him going into the ring, but Rolly dealt with most of those same things, and it didn't affect him. So kudos to Rolly Romero for capitalizing on an opportunity that most people thought that he wouldn't be able to exploit. Ryan Garcia was an 11-1 favorite. I mean, it was almost like it was so disrespectful to Rolly Romero and his punching power, despite that he's not the one thing I would say, though, Rolly doesn't get a lot of, he got beat. He looked bad in the Isak Cruz fight, but I wrote a story for the Rings website last week, an in-depth, deep dive on what he was going through in his life. He felt the criticism that comes with it, but he felt like he was in a mental space where he just shouldn't have been training and shouldn't have been fighting. He has since gotten therapy and worked through some of the issues, some childhood trauma and some other, being falsely accused of sexually assault, a lot of the things that happened to him over the course of the last few years. And he felt much better mentally and physically going into this fight. So he felt like it was the perfect opportunity for him to capitalize on being an underdog and overlooked in this fight. And he always felt like if he got the opportunity to fight Ryan Garcia, that he would win, and he did.
Based off that, and we'll move on to Devin, his performance, but based off of that, do you think that the Haney Garcia rematch is dead in the water, or do you think it still can get made?
I just don't think it should happen next, and that's again something I wrote for our website. Or I think it's incumbent upon Turki Al-Sheikh at this point to say, "Hey, look, this is not the right time for this rematch. Now there's no momentum moving toward it. Ryan obviously lost. I mean, if they both would have won, well, and they won in the way that Devin won, and let's just say Ryan Garcia won a split decision or something, you could still wouldn't have been the best idea probably, but you could move forward with it because they both won. I don't see how you sell Ryan Garcia in this fight and make the type of revenue off of it that you're hoping based on him failing a PED test, being suspended for an entire year, and then performing the way that he did on Friday night. That's a tough sell, even though there's a huge rivalry there and a lot for them to clean up because he tested positive for Ostarine. But um, it's not the time for the fight. I just think you can revisit it. Let them go beat other guys. I'd like to see Devin Haney fight Teofimo Lopez. They have a rivalry as well. Teofimo won his fight in impressive fashion on Friday night. Even if they have to fight at a catch weight, whatever, make it 143, 144. If Teofimo is willing to move up to 147 to fight a monster in Jaron Ennis, he should be willing to fight Devin Haney at 144 or whatever it might be. So I hope that that's the route that they go. And then let Ryan go get himself together and get him in the ring with someone reasonable and see if he can win in impressive fashion, because I don't think there's no reason and certainly no momentum in terms of making that rematch next.
Yeah. On to Haney as well. With those 12 rounds against Jose Ramirez, look, it's clearly a safety first performance from him, and it's clear that there was probably some overriding demons from the Ryan Garcia fight. Now he's done the 12 rounds and he's gone through those demons. Do you think we see a more improved Haney after sort of, because he hasn't? Do you think he gets over the hangover after the Garcia fight with that Jose Ramirez performance?
Well, I certainly hope so, because none of us want to sit through something like that again.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because I spoke to Erickson Lubin yesterday, and Erickson is fighting on Saturday night against Ardrell Holmes in an IBF elimination match. And who better to talk about what it's like to come back from devastating defeats than Erickson Lubin? The two losses on his record, or he got knocked out by Jermell Charlo with one punch in what was obviously the biggest fight of his career to that point.
Yeah.
He rebuilds himself, gets himself back into position, and fights for an interim title against Sebastian Fundora, and engages in one of the most brutal fights that we've seen in a long time, where his face was literally rearranged when he left the ring. And I saw him the next morning at breakfast, and I was like, man, at the hotel, I like the kid. He's a very nice person, Erickson Lubin, a tough guy, obviously. And I said, man, maybe it's time for him to call it a career. I mean, your face is getting rearranged like that. You don't know what kind of damage it did to him in the long term, and thankfully it didn't. My point in telling you this is he came back and fought. He didn't come back and dance around the ring for 12 rounds or whatever it was that Devin Haney did the other day. And I get it, because he's got to figure out, like, can I take a punch? And Lubin said he came back against a much lesser fighter than Jose Ramirez after he got knocked out by one punch against Jermell Charlo. And he said in his mind going into that fight, even though it was a Mexican fighter, I can't remember, Silverio Ortiz, I think his name was, he had a bad record. He was like 27-18 or something, but he could crack a little bit. And he fought a lot of guys, and that's how he had so many losses. But he felt like until he took that first clean shot where he knew that he could get past it, he had it in the back of his mind, much like I'm sure Devin Haney did throughout the fight on Friday night. But Lubin is very friendly with Haney, and he said, like, he knows Haney mental makeup and everything. And he said once he'll get past it, just like I did, he'll get past it, and he'll fight much more in the way that he usually fights than he did Friday night. So let's hope Erickson Lubin's right. He knows Devin Haney much better than I do. He knows the mental makeup of fighters much better than I do. So I just hope that he's correct about that, because Devin Haney has a world of talent, and there are so many good matchups. Even if we never see him fight Ryan Garcia again, there are so many interesting matchups for him to be put into here. Let's just hope that he's more than what he was on Friday night.
Yeah. I know you spoke about him potentially fighting Teofimo Lopez. Yeah, and I know you just touched on the fight there, but there's a bit of mixed reviews on Teo's performance. I know a lot of people were very happy with it, some not so happy. From what was, let's say, ultimately an underwhelming night fight, do you think Teo was a bit of a silver liner with his performance?
Yeah, he won convincingly, and he was good defensively, and he didn't get much cooperation from Arnold Barboza, who I thought didn't really make any adjustments from round one until round 12. He just kind of tried to do the same thing over and over again, which obviously was not working. Teofimo is obviously a very smart fighter, very athletic, good defensively, punches in combination. It wasn't an entertaining fight either, but that was not really reflective of Teofimo as much as it was Arnold Barboza, and he won convincingly. There's no discrepancy about who won, and he was just too good for Arnold Barboza that night. And I would love to see him in fights against higher level opponents. Barboza's a good fighter, but I'd like to see him in there against a really talented guy like Haney. The Hitchens fight, I don't know what to, because I think Hitchens mostly, while he's very talented, also I think he's going to be mostly in kind of ho-hum fights, unless he changes up his style and becomes a little more aggressive, which is counter to how he wins fights. I don't know that there's going to be much demand to see Hitchens, other than that they have titles. And don't even get me started on this 4-belt system, because I've had it with this nonsense. But so kudos to him for making some money, and he won one of the titles, and that's fine. Is there much public demand to see, because Richardson Hitchens is going to shut out George Kambosos? I'm almost positive of that. I think we all are. I think it'll be comparable to the way Devin Haney beat George Kambosos twice. I think that's the way that fight will go, June 14th for the most part. And assuming that happens, then Hitchens is going to be looking to fight one of the other champions. Now, I hope that it's not Teofimo Lopez, because I want Lopez to fight other guys. But then you have to do some cross-promotional, other side of the street type of stuff with Gary Antoine Russell or Alberto Puello, who are PBC fighters. And I'd like to see Gary Antoine Russell fight anyone at this point, because of the way he fought in his last performance. His last performance was fantastic, and he really, I think, really finally maximized his potential in that fight. So I'm looking forward to seeing him in big fights moving forward.
Do you think Teo could make the move up to 147 against the Boots or something like that? Or is it a step too far?
I prefer not to see it. If he can make 140 comfortably, I think there are enough fights in and around the 140-pound division for Teofimo. I admire his ambition, but I think that if he gets in the ring with Jaron Ennis, Jaron might be 165 or something he's just too big. He's too big. He's very athletic. He's very smart. He punches with power in both hands. He throws look at the combination that he threw to finish off Imantas Stanionis. Who's throwing successive left uppercuts to the body and the head? Boxers are not doing that. And I give Teofimo a lot of credit for wanting that type of fight. I would just prefer him to fight other people. And then I want to see Jaron Ennis, if he can't get these unification fights, which again, I don't really care about all that much. I get why he cares about it. I don't. And fans hopefully don't all that much, because I don't think either of those fights are going to happen anytime soon. So hopefully he would then just move up to 154, where he's well suited to fight just from a physical standpoint. And there are plenty of fights at 154 for Jaron. I would rather see him compete against 154 pounders that we would love to see him in the ring with, and Teofimo stick to more in and around his weight class.
I wanted to focus attention to Riyadh, particularly Canelo against Scull. I was
Do we
there.
Do we have to?
Yeah, it was. Listen, I was tired enough of it being 6, 7 a.m. But look, with a fight like that, I wanted to ask yourself, Keith, who is to blame? Who really is to blame for it being? Do you put the blame on Canelo, Scull for being particularly negative? Like, how would you view it?
I think there's culpability on both sides. William Scull did not come to win that fight, and when you're presented with the biggest opportunity and obviously the biggest payday of your career, I think you kind of owe it to yourself, your family, to the people who've guided you into this position, to bring more to the ring than he brought. He seemed quite fine with going 12 rounds, a lot of smiling and happiness about, I don't know what exactly, but I think he was content to go 12 rounds against an elite level legendary fighter like Canelo. So I don't really give William Scull a lot of credit for the way he performed. He did win some rounds, because I do think, one thing, Lewis, is there's in judging seminars, they don't emphasize defense as much as they once did. So I didn't know how much credit he was going to get, because I know in U.S. judging seminars, I don't know how it's going in other countries, but in U.S. judging seminars, for the most part, they have de-emphasized defense. So you're not getting as much credit for it as one of the criteria for scoring boxing as you once did. So I didn't know, are people going to give him 3 rounds, 4 rounds? I thought one of those two would be fair, 117, 111, 116, 112, because they're just rounds where Canelo's literally not doing anything
Yeah.
except kind of moving around. I don't know how you give him credit for doing that. So I think they're both culpable in how bad the fight was, but I would put more blame on Canelo Alvarez because you wanted this fight. You knew that it was a safe fight for you to take for an enormous amount of money. I don't blame him for capitalizing on his star power. And, the Turkey and the Saudis wanted to prevent him from fighting Jake Paul. They wanted this Crawford fight to happen. So they were willing to overpay for him to fight William Scull to make sure that he fought Crawford next. That's fine. But Canelo has some responsibility to make an entertaining fight against a person who he really shouldn't be in the ring with. And he's being grossly overpaid to fight William Scull. The least you could have done was made it somewhat entertaining and tried to knock him out. I hate it when fighters, particularly a fighter at his level, and he's done it more than once, just after the fight says, well, he was moving around. Like, it's not his responsibility to
Mm.
stand directly in front of you and let you tee off on him. That's not boxing. So if you can't figure out how to cut the ring off at 34 years old when you have almost 70 fights on your record, well, shame on you.
Yeah. Well, I guess now that brings us on to the Terence Crawford fight. And when you look at that performance from Skull, and particularly the last few performances from Canelo Alvarez, how interesting do you feel like a fight of him and Crawford now is, if you find it interesting at all?
Yeah, over the course of time, from when it was first mentioned until where we are today, I'm more interested, more intrigued with the Crawford Canelo fight in the sense that I've seen some slippage in Canelo.
Mm.
Crawford is not your typical 37-year-old fighter. And I don't really think that a 13-month layoff is going to make all that much of a difference for Crawford because he has come off long layoffs in the past and fought at the elite level. Look what he did against Errol Spence. Now, some people will say, well, Errol had gone through, car accidents and detached retinas and all. He went through a lot. I get it. But Terence Crawford has never been affected by long layoffs for the most part. So I wouldn't assume that to be the case here. I think he'll be fine. It might not be as sharpest, but he's not, and he won't use it as an excuse anyway because he's the one who chose to take. He could have taken a tune-up fight in between or something for less money, but he opted to wait for this fight. So if he does make that excuse, no one's going to want to hear it because that's how he chose to play this out. But I do think the fight's going to be competitive, and I really do think there's going to be a point um, when Crawford's winning the fight. He's going to win rounds against Canelo because he's a better boxer. He's a smarter. He's frankly he's a better boxer than Canelo. He's smarter, has a more diverse skill set, but he's a welterweight. I mean, I know technically he's coming up from junior middleweight, but he's really a welterweight, and he wasn't considered the biggest welterweight, right? So
Yeah.
he's moving up 2 more weight classes, even though he has already put on the weight and all that. You don't know how that's going to impact him physically because he'll be almost 38 years old by the time they get into the ring on September 12th. And maybe it'll slow him down a little bit, having extra weight, being a little older. Maybe his legs might not be exactly the same. But I think he'll figure out a way to win rounds. But I think there's going to be a point in the fight when Canelo's power, because Crawford is not going to run. He's not. He's saying he's going to stand there and trade with him like Gaddy Ward or anything like that, but he's not going to run. So I think there's going to be opportunities for Canelo to catch him in counters and in exchanges. And I think there's going to be a point when he hits him with something that might just be too much for Crawford because, and that's not a criticism of Crawford. He's moving up to 168 pounds. I mean, you got to give him credit for that. But will he have ever been hit in the ring? He's been hit in sparring by big guys. He spars heavyweights. He's told us that for a long time. But sparring is a lot different than fights, as we well know, with smaller gloves, no headgear, the bright lights, and all that. So let's see how he reacts to getting hit, not only to the head but to the body in particular. And I think eventually Canelo's power might become the factor in the fight that's too much for Crawford.
Just before I do let you go, I did want to touch on obviously what was probably the most positive thing from the weekend. Naoya Inoue against Cardenas, climbed off the canvas again to claim victory. Yeah, what
Yeah.
was your main takeaway from the performance of which a great knockout from Inoue again?
Yeah, kudos to Ramon Cardenas, man. That guy came to fight.
Yeah.
Whereas our complaints mostly about Friday and
Yeah.
Saturday, people did not come to fight. He made a
Yeah.
lot less money than all those guys, and he came to fight. He
Yeah.
said, "You know what? They're calling me a Lyft driver or Uber, whatever uh, service he works for. Well, he's a damn tough Lyft driver, right? I mean, because that
Yeah.
guy, he brought it, and you know, punch for punch, firepower for firepower. When he was in some ways kind of bringing like a slingshot to a bazooka fight, right? And so he knocks down Inoue. Like, it's the second knockdown in the last four fights for Inoue, so he's not infallible, obviously. But I give Inoue a lot of credit for coming back the way that he did. Um, because he did it against Neri as well. He got knocked down. He wasn't flustered by it. I don't think he was really hurt. I think he was more
Mm.
surprised and just kind of off balance. I didn't think he was really all that hurt. And the way he
Yeah.
came back and dismantled Cardenas is impressive.
Yeah, definitely. And do you think with a case of Inoue now, as he's, there's talk of featherweight and moving up. Do you think he's starting to sort of meet his match now when it comes to, because this is like the second time he's been dropped at Super Bantam. So do you think there's a case to be made there? He's just starting to sort of meet his match in a sense, in a way.
But you know how it goes, Lewis. People tend to get carried away in boxing. A guy,
Yeah.
dominant fighter, goes on a nice run where he looks untouchable. And people are like, "Oh, well, I want to see him fight Gervonta." Calm down. Like,
Mhm.
he's
Yeah,
not
yeah,
fighting.
no, I'm not saying that.
Relax. I mean, it's
Yeah.
like, so he's where he belongs. I think he's capped out at
Mm.
junior featherweight is where he belongs. Probably, I'd love to see him fight Junto Nakatani, and obviously
Mm.
what would be the biggest all Japanese fight in the history of the sport. So hopefully we see that fight. I don't need to see him move up to featherweight to fight.
Mhm.
Look, we saw in the co-feature.
Mm.
Don't put him anywhere near Rafael Espinosa.
Yeah, no
He's
way.
a 6'1" tornado, for God's sake. Like, I would not. I mean, what is it? In a way, 5'3", almost a foot bigger than him. He's an unusually tall featherweight, but he's
Yeah.
almost a foot bigger than him. He never stops throwing punches. And Bob Arum actually had said to me a few months ago, it was after Espinoza fought the last time, so however long ago that was. He said, "Yeah, I wouldn't recommend." He said, "I'll leave it to my matchmakers, but I wouldn't recommend putting Inoue in the ring
Yeah.
with Espinoza if he moves up." So I think he's going to stay at junior featherweight for now. He's obviously fighting Akhmadaliev in his next fight, which is a tough fight, even though
Yeah.
he lost to Palace, and of course Inoue knocked out to Palace. I think maybe that was more an off night for Akhmadaliev. I don't know if he took to Palace lightly or whatever, not to discredit to Palace, but I think he's going to bring the best of himself in that fight, and I think we'll see Inoue in a real fight, and then he'll fight someone else in December, maybe if he does move forward with this plan of fighting, four times or whatever in a relatively short span of time, and then hopefully we'll get to the Nakatani fight. They both have to continue winning, and hopefully we get to that fight because that's what people want to see. And Nakatani's no ordinary bantamweight. He's going to be, of course, moving up in weight, 4 more pounds to fight Inoue, but he's much taller. He's got a devastating left hand, and he's been
Yeah.
knocked out twice, with left hands. So we'll see what happens.
For sure, we definitely will. Keith, always a pleasure. I really appreciate you taking time to speak to me. Always good to see you. And as always, mate, keep doing great things on the website. But yeah, look, appreciate you taking time to speak to me, and yeah, I'm sure we'll be catching up soon, mate. Appreciate it.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Lewis. Likewise, man. Have a good day, man.
Cheers.